Alright, so it took me a minute to get this set up. Sorry. It's the way it goes. I'm William. I'm doing a live broadcast for the first time. I want to know how many people are fed up. I'm not wearing a cassock, not wearing vestments. I'm just standing in front of you as an American. I'm not just a bishop, retired, but I am also a former Marine, Vietnam, combat veteran, 100% disabled. I've been working outdoors most of my life. Paper routes from the time I was 12 years old, morning and afternoon. Paper routes. Started working construction at age 16, joined the Marine Corps at age 17, Vietnam age 18. Fully discharged by the time I was 20. I've been working construction for almost 44 years, I suppose, and then another 6 years for an airline in the United States. And I'm tired. I'm tired of the governmental lies. Are you tired of them? I am. So let me ask you this. What are we going to do? We have this COVID-19. Now I'm going to tell you right now, I don't object to following law. I have no problem at all following law. I have my whole life I've followed the law. But I'm telling you, the law has to know what it's talking about. Our government right now is lying to us. The left half of this government, the so-called liberals, the Democrats, whatever names they want to call themselves or anyone else wants to call them, doesn't matter. They don't want the United States to be as it was. They don't. It's a total control grab. Yes, there are sick people. Yes, the virus is a real virus. No doubt about it. I am not saying it isn't. And I am not saying obeying the civil law regarding the actual virus and the numbers is wrong, because it isn't. But the civil law has to be truthful. The government has to stop its lies. They want total control of the people. I, for one, am tired of it. I don't know how you feel. That's what the purpose of this video is. I have a history of recessions in the United States here, so just quickly I'm going to read them. When did the United States become the United States officially? July 4th, 1776, correct? So this is a history, 1776. So 21 years later, we had a panic in 1797, which resulted from land speculation in the newly formed United States. The bubble burst just as deflation in Europe impacted the rest of the world. Robert Morris, who helped finance the Revolutionary War, ended up in prison for his debts. He was in debt despite owning more land at that time than anyone else in the United States. 1857, the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company failed. In addition, approximately 5,000 businesses went under during the first year of a panic that lasted 18 months. 5,000 businesses went out because of a panic that lasted 18 months. 1873, J. Cook and Company was the largest U.S. bank when it failed. Subsequent labor issues led to the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. The recession lasted more than 5 years. 1893, the failure of the Reading Railroad was a key component of this recession, which lasted approximately 4 years. Unemployment topped 12% by some estimates. Over 500 banks closed. 1907, Congress created the Federal Reserve System in response to the collapse of the New York's Knickerbocker Trust Company. The stock market dropped about dramatically during this recession, which lasted about a year. 1929 to 1938, the Great Depression. Lasting from 1929 until 1938, it was the biggest economic crisis in U.S. history. Unemployment reached 25% in 1933 and remained at 19% in 1938. The Depression ended because of three things: the New Deal, which I won't get into in this particular video, the end of the drought that caused the Dust Bowl, which again I won't get into in this video, and increased spending for World War II. In 1945, this recession lasted 8 months, from February to October, although it felt longer to those who endured it. The GDP continued falling until it reached minus 11.6% in 1946. It was a natural result of the demobilization from World War II and the sharp drop in demand for military weapons. Government spending also dropped, although business spending was robust. In 1949, this 11-month recession began in November 1948. It lasted until October 1949, when unemployment reached a peak of 7.9%. It was a mild adjustment as the economy continued adapting to peacetime production. The GDP growth. 1949, January to March, negative 5.4%. April to June, negative 1.4%. July to September, a positive 4.2%. October to December, a negative 3.3%. This was in 1949. In 1953, this recession lasted 10 months, from July 1953 to May 1954. It resulted from demobilization following the Korean War. Unemployment didn't reach its peak of 6.1% until September 1954, 4 months after the recession ended. In 1953, the GDP contracted 2.2% in the third quarter and 5.9% in quarter four. In 1954, it contracted a positive 1.9% in quarter one. 1957, in this recession, which took place from August 1957 to April 1958, the GDP fell 4.1% in quarter four, 1957. Then plummeted another 10% in quarter one, 1958. Unemployment didn't reach its peak of 7.5% until July 1958. The Fed's contractionary monetary policy is considered the cause of this economic slowdown. Now, I'm not going to get into that portion either. Right now, I'm just giving you the different economic so-called recessions of the United States since its inception. 1960. Starting in April 1960, this recession lasted 10 months until February 1961. The GDP was a negative 2.1% in quarter two of 1960. It rose 2.0% in quarter three, but was a negative 5% in quarter four. Unemployment reached a peak of 7.1% in 1961. President John F. Kennedy ended the recession with stimulus spending. His opponent, Richard Nixon, said the recession cost him the election. He had been vice president, so voters blamed the Republicans for causing it. 1970. This recession was relatively mild, lasting 11 months, from December 1969 to November 1970. The GDP was a negative 1.9% in quarter four, 1969. It was a negative 0.6% in quarter one, then rose to a positive 0.6% in quarter two and 3.7% positive in quarter three. In the fourth quarter, it was a negative 4.2% before rising 11.3% in quarter one of 1971. Unemployment peaked at 6.1% in December of 1970. 1973 to 1975, this recession lasted 16 months from November 1973 to March 1975. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, is blamed for quadrupling oil prices. But the OPEC oil embargo alone didn't cause such a deep recession. Two other factors contributed. First, President Nixon instituted wage price controls. This kept prices too high, reducing demand. Wage controls made salary too high and forced businesses to lay off workers. Second, Nixon took the United States off of the gold standard in response to a run on the gold held at Fort Knox, which led to inflation. The price of gold skyrocketed to $120 an ounce while the dollar's value plummeted. The result was stagflation and 5 quarters of negative GDP growth. 1973 in the third quarter was a negative 2.1%. 1974 first quarter negative 3.4%. By the third quarter a negative 3.7%. The fourth quarter a negative 1.5%. In 1975 the first quarter was a negative 4.8%. Unemployment reached a peak of 9% in May 1975, 2 months after the recession had ended. 1980 to 1982, the economy suffered a double whammy of 2 recessions in this period. There was one during the first 6 months of 1980. The second lasted 16 months from July 1981 to November of 1982. The Fed caused this recession by raising interests to combat inflation. That reduced business spending. The Iranian oil embargo aggravated economic conditions by reducing U.S. oil supplies, which drove up prices. The GDP was negative for 6 of the 12 quarters. The worst was the second quarter, 1980, at a negative 8.0%, until the 2008-2009 recession. That was the worst quarterly decline since the Great Depression. Unemployment rose to 10.8% in November and December 1982, the highest level in any modern recession. It was above 10% for 10 months. President Reagan lowered the tax rate and boosted the defense budget, helping to end the recession. Here's the GDP growth. 1980, quarter one positive 1.3%, quarter two negative 8.0%, quarter three negative 0.5%, quarter four a positive 7.7%. 1981, quarter one positive 8.1%. By the second quarter, a negative 2.9%. By the third quarter, a positive 4.9%. But in the fourth quarter, it was back down to a negative 4.3%. 1982, the first quarter, it was at a negative 6.1%. Quarter two, up 1.8%, or to a positive 1.8%. In the third quarter, a negative 1.5%, and in the fourth quarter, a positive 0.2%. 1990 to 1991, this recession ran 9 months, from July 1990 to March 1991. The 1989 savings and loan crisis caused it. The GDP was negative 3.6% in quarter four of 1990 and a negative 1.9% in quarter one of 1991. Unemployment peaked at 7.8% in June 1992. 2001. The 2001 recession lasted 8 months from March to November. It was caused by a boom and subsequent bust in dot-com businesses. The boom was partially created by the Y2K scare. Remember that one in 2000? Companies bought billions of dollars worth of new software because they were afraid the old systems weren't designed to transition from the 1900s to the 2000s. But many dot-com businesses were significantly overvalued and failed. The 9/11 attack worsened the recession. The economy contracted in 2 quarters. Quarter one, negative 1.1%, and quarter three, a negative 1.7%. Unemployment continued rising until it peaked at 6.3% in June of 2003. 2008 to 2009, the Great Recession, was the worst financial crisis in the United States since the 1929 Depression. It also was the longest lasting from December 2007 to June of 2009. The subprime mortgage crisis was the trigger. That created a global bank credit crisis. in 2007. By 2008, the credit crisis had spread to the general economy through the widespread use of derivatives. The economy shrank in 5 quarters, including 4 quarters in a row. 2 quarters contracted more than 5%. In the fourth quarter of 2008, the GDP was a negative 8.4%, worse than any other recession since the Great Depression. The recession ended in the third quarter of 2009 when GDP turned positive, thanks to an economic stimulus package. So, tracking the recessions, the BEA revises its GDP estimates as it receives new data. It often recalibrates its estimates in July of each year, using the 2008 to 2009 recession as an example. Here are the final estimates compared to the initial estimates made 1 month after the quarter ended. These numbers demonstrate how difficult it is to correct a recession until it's already started. They also serve as a reminder of how difficult it is to time the market with your investments. 2008, first quarter, the economy shrank 1.8%. Initially, the BEA thought it shrank 0.7%. Quarter 2, the economy rebounded to 1.3% growth. The initial release said it grew 0.6%. Many people thought the Fed's rescue of Bear Stearns, which we're not going to get into here again, ended the threat to financial markets. In the third quarter, the economy shrank 3.7%, less than the negative 4.0% initial estimate. In the fourth quarter, the economy collapsed, shrinking 8.9%. The BEA initially said it shrank only 3.8%, which seemed bad enough. In 2009, the first quarter, the economy shrank 6.7%. The initial estimate said it shrank 4.9%. In quarter 2, the initial estimate that the economy contracted by 0.7% was unchanged. So, let me ask you, what the hell? This is not a new thing. Many of those that I just read to you affected me. I've lost 5 homes. I've moved up and down the East Coast 7 times. South Carolina to Maryland, South Carolina to Florida, to South Carolina to Maryland. Back and forth, back and forth. Chasing work because of this nonsense. So now here we are in COVID-19, the coronavirus, and how many people are out of businesses now, shut down, out of work. How many people are going to lose their homes? Not just their business, but their whole life is going to be shot down. How many? How much of this is a lie and how much of it is true? People need to demand honesty and transparency because this is nonsense. And the United States people better start getting tired of it real quick. That's all I can tell you. I'm not telling you to revolt. That would be senseless. It'll just get a lot of people killed and the government's still going to exist. Armed revolt, I don't believe, is an answer to today's government. It's not like we're riding horses and carrying swords and we can overpower the soldiers or the knights. It's not the same as in the Revolutionary War. It's a whole different world. You need to think, strategize, discuss things, and decide what to do intelligently. But we need to be acting together. That's all I've got to say about this. This is my first live performance. Sorry for any screw-ups along the way. Enjoy your day. Thank you.